September 12th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with the U.S. presidential debate. Local polls indicate that registered voters who watched Tuesday's debate broadly concur that Vice President Kamala Harris did better than former President Donald Trump. Trump, however, insists that he won the debate. North Korea fired short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea this morning. This is the first missile provocation by the North since July 1st. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has hinted that the West is considering allowing Kyiv to use long-range missiles against Russia. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he believes his country's victory plan depends on support from Ukraine's allies. North Korea this morning fired multiple short-range ballistic missiles toward the East Sea. South Korea's Joint Chief of Staff said they're analyzing the types and range of missiles launched from the Pyongyang area at around 7:10 in the morning. The JCS is on high alert for potential additional launches and is sharing relevant information with the U.S. and Japan. Now, the last time the North fired a ballistic missile was over 2 months ago on July 1st. Pyongyang then said it had succeeded in test launches of a new type of tactical ballistic missile. Flash polls immediately following the U.S. presidential debate on Tuesday suggest that more people think Kamala Harris performed better. While insisting he won the debate, Donald Trump has shown little interest in doing a second one. Our Lee-Hoo reports.
Kamala Harris.
Following Tuesday's U.S. presidential debate between Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris and former President and Republican candidate Donald Trump, polls across the U.S. show that more Americans think Harris won the debate. CNN's flash poll results show that 63% of registered voters think Harris outperformed Trump. This is echoed by analysis from the American news outlet The Hill, which found that 49.4% of Americans support Harris, while 45.8% support Trump. After the debate, pop music artist Taylor Swift announced her endorsement of Harris, saying Harris fights for the rights and causes that Swift believes need a warrior to champion them. However, Trump asserted that he won and that he is looking at having other debates, but without set plans.
You know, when you win, you don't really necessarily have to do it a second time. So we'll see. But I thought we had a great debate last night.
Tuesday's debate on ABC attracted 57.5 million television viewers across 7 TV networks, according to preliminary Nielsen data on Wednesday. This tops the June debate between Trump and then-candidate President Joe Biden. On the day after the debate, the two candidates both attended a September 11 memorial event and exchanged a handshake. 7 weeks remain until voting day. It's expected the candidates will focus on some 7 swing states in the country, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Harris will likely focus on issues such as women's rights to abortion, as well as working with President Biden to release hostages in the Israel-Hamas war, while Trump will likely focus on blaming Harris for the lack of border control and economic issues, including inflation, under the Biden administration. Lee-Hoo, Arirang News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Wednesday that his country's victory plan relies largely on support from Ukraine's allies, calling on restrictions on long-range missiles to be lifted. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken signaled that the request is on the discussion table. Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy held talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv on Wednesday. As Ukraine looks to change the tide of the war further, Zelensky has called for additional support from his allies, including a lifting of restrictions on the use of long-range missiles. In response, Blinken said he'll discuss the matter with U.S. President Joe Biden.
I'm going to take that discussion back to Washington to brief the president on what I heard. I know that David's doing the same. And both of our bosses, no doubt, will discuss this when they meet later this week, actually. From day one, as you've heard me say, we have adjusted and adapted as needs have changed, as the battlefield has changed. And I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that as this evolves.
Ukraine has been pushing for the lifting of missile restrictions so that it can target deeper inside Russia. The U.S. has also pledged an additional $700 million in aid for Ukraine, while the UK has pledged $782 million. According to the Ukrainian leader, Kyiv's victory over Moscow depends on the support of its allies, including Washington. He also said that he plans to share Ukraine's so-called victory plan with President Biden, adding that it's important for Ukraine to announce the plan to its allies before the second Ukrainian peace conference, which is scheduled to be held in November. Meanwhile, the EU's Energy Commissioner, Kadri Simpson, said the bloc will continue to phase out of its reliance on Russian gas, amid reports that show Europe still relies on Russia for almost a fifth of its gas imports. Speaking to reporters in Brussels, Simpson said that the EU remains fully committed to completing the phase-out of Russian gas, which can be done without challenging Europe's energy security of supply. When asked if the EU's Energy Commission was planning to impose sanctions on Russian natural gas imports, the commissioner said that Moscow has already lost any leverage it had over the bloc. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
When it comes to travel, South Korea, Japan, and China are often popular destinations for each other. Now, with this in mind, tourism ministers from these three countries met in Japan for the first time in 5 years. Our culture correspondent Song Yujin has more.
40 million. That's the new annual target for trilateral people-to-people exchanges set by South Korea, China, and Japan by 2030, an increase of 10 million from the current levels. This goal was set at the 10th South Korea-China-Japan Tourism Ministers meeting held in Kobe, Japan on Wednesday, the first meeting of its kind since 2019. Attended by South Korea's Minister of Culture, Sports and Tourism Yoo In-chun, China's Vice Minister of Culture and Tourism Jang Jung, and Japan's Minister of Land Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism Saito Tetsuo, the focus this year was on three areas: engaging the younger generations, boosting regional tourism, and improving travel convenience.
The younger generations represent the future of all three countries. We discussed how governments should step up efforts to encourage more school trips between our nations.
They also shared ideas on promoting tourism in lesser-known regions of each country, especially as all three face shrinking populations and significant regional imbalances, while popular destinations struggle with over-tourism.
We agreed on the importance of revitalizing regional airports and expanding bus routes and other forms of public transport. The idea is to develop policies that bring more tourists in to visit regions beyond major cities like Seoul, Busan, and Jeju.
We'll share effective strategies with each other, like the policy package our government introduced last October to address over-tourism. We agreed on the importance of dispersing visitors from overcrowded tourist spots and ensuring a more balanced spread of tourists across the country.
However, increasing tourism isn't just about attraction. It's also about convenience. The three countries touched on ways to improve the entry and departure processes, such as the pre-entry immigration screening system Seoul and Tokyo are considering. The meeting concluded with the signing of a joint declaration that included these commitments, with the three sides promising to meet in China next year. So with the tourism ministers meeting concluding on Wednesday, next up is the South Korea, China, Japan culture ministers meeting scheduled to take place in Kyoto on Thursday. Song Yujin, Arirang News, Kobe.
Despite an excellent performance by South Korea's key growth engine, exports, household debt is reportedly putting the brakes on a full economic recovery. Let's turn to Professor Dr. Isan for details. Good morning.
Good morning.
So the Bank for International Settlements has warned that household debt is what's slowing South Korea's economic growth. First off, how is South Korea actually doing in terms of household debt?
Yeah, the household debt to GDP ratio had reached above 100% since the third quarter of 2020 and kept increasing until mid last year. Although the ratio plateaued out this year A rise in housing transactions in Seoul metropolitan region boosted the demand for mortgage lending in August. The dynamics of household debt of South Korea have been mainly influenced by the fluctuations in the housing market, interest rate, and housing demand and supply.
Well, then you have to tell us, is household debt really dragging down the country's economy? I mean, is this a systematic risk that looks to linger?
Yeah, as the BIS report denoted, the increase in general credit may have both positive and negative effects on economic activity, and the relationship between credit and growth tends to be a hump shape. That is, at low levels, more credit is associated with higher growth, but as credit increases, its contribution to growth tends to decline, and at some point it turns negative. This is because at a higher level of credit, financial resources are directed towards less productive sectors like construction and real estate. The high level of household debt also constrains the consumption, as the larger share of household income is allocated to debt repayments.
Well, the good news is, though, that the country's exports, including chips, are doing well. The country's exports rose at nearly 25% on year, and the first 10 days of May on the back of global demand for semiconductors. Will this trend continue for the rest of the year and possibly in the coming year?
Yeah, actually, export growth is quite strong currently and is expected to remain robust for the rest of the year and also in the coming year. But there are some uncertainties surrounding the U.S. Economic performance and fluctuations in semiconductor cycles that pose potential risk.
Well, KDI, your workplace, released a report that South Korea's economy is showing signs of constrained improvement despite strong exports because of weak domestic demand. Now, will this support domestic consumption? When will it recover, actually? What does it depend on?
Domestic consumption has been relatively weak since the second half of last year, driven by persistently high inflation, heavy debt repayment burdens, and sluggish income growth, particularly among the self-employed. However, domestic demand is anticipated to recover gradually this year, the second half of this year, supported by strong export growth and declining interest rate globally.
Then let's talk about inflation. What about inflation? Inflation in August last month did ease to the government's target level of 2%. This is the lowest seen since March 2021. Can we be relieved?
Inflation is expected to come down gradually, and the average of this year would be around 2.5, 2.4%, according to many forecasters. And, in my view, and also from the, outlook of other institutions, the inflation could remain at the level around the target of 2% next year as well.
Alrighty, thank you so much for your time and your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
The U.S. Consumer Price Index slowed to its lowest level in 3.5 years in August, further boosting chances of a benchmark rate cut later this month. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics on Wednesday, CPI rose 2.5% year-on-year last month, slightly lower than the market expectation of 2.6%. U.S. inflation also fell 0.4 percentage points from a month earlier. Excluding volatile energy and food prices, the core CPI rose 3.2% on year. That's up 0.3 percentage points from a month earlier. The economy was on top of the agenda at the parliament on Wednesday. South Korean lawmakers quizzed government officials over an array of issues, including the recent e-commerce chaos. Our political correspondent Arirang has this report.
On the third day of the four-day parliamentary questioning, South Korea's slow recovery of domestic demand was the first topic to take center stage.
Domestic demand hasn't improved much, and many people share this concern. What are your thoughts?
We're working to support people's livelihoods. While inflation has stabilized, food and agricultural prices are still affected by climate change. The government is still trying to stabilize prices during the Chuseok holiday by increasing the supply of agricultural products and offering various discounts.
Also, the liquidity crises at e-commerce platforms Tmall and WeMakePrice, which recently created massive chaos here, were included in the question list. Prime Minister Han Duck-soo disagreed with the DP lawmakers' claim that the government should share the blame for the situation. Meanwhile, a PPP lawmaker emphasized the government's efforts to address the issues faced by vendors affected by the payment delays from the two companies.
The Ministry of SMEs and Startups is providing emergency funding to support many sellers and consumers affected by the crisis at Tmall and WeMakePrice, right?
Regarding the issue of payments owed to merchants, the government has allocated a total of 570 billion won in emergency funding. The interest rate on loans was initially 3.5%, but after requests to lower it, it's now 2.5%. Payments began on August 16th to quickly help those affected.
Another DP lawmaker asked the finance minister the reason the government objected to the opposition-led bill that aims to provide economic relief payments in the form of vouchers to the entire population. The DP has been trying again to push forward with the bill that was vetoed by President Yoon Suk-yeol a month ago.
The recovery in domestic demand hasn't reached small businesses in traditional markets. The local currency vouchers you mentioned can be used more widely, and while they might be helpful regionally, there's doubt about whether they will truly boost consumption nationwide.
He added that unlike local currency vouchers, the current onnuri gift certificates are aimed specifically at small businesses and traditional markets, emphasizing their greater impact. 신하영, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Kim Xiang, and this is The World Now. Vietnam continues to battle the aftermath of Typhoon Yagi, which battered the north of the country and killed at least 179 people and left 145 missing since making landfall on Saturday. According to local media, an entire village in northern Vietnam was swept away by flash floods, which killed 16 on Wednesday. The day before, 30 people died after mud and debris buried 35 families in another village. Now, thousands of people living near the swollen Red River in the capital Hanoi were evacuated on Wednesday as water levels rose to a 20-year high. Some schools in the city have told students to stay at home for the rest of the week, while power has been cut to some districts due to safety concerns. Now, Vietnamese state media said 10 out of 30 administrative districts are under a flood alert. Asia's most powerful typhoon so far this year, Yagi brought heavy rain and strong winds and continued to wreak havoc as it moved westwards, leading to the collapse of a bridge also on Monday. Kosovo announced the indictment of 45 suspects on terrorism charges on Wednesday, almost a year after some 80 ethnic Serb gunmen stormed a village in North Kosovo and battled police in a shootout, leaving 4 dead, including a Kosovar police officer. According to the Kosovo police, on September 24th last year, about 80 gunmen entered northern Kosovo from Serbia in armored vehicles and barricaded themselves in a Serbian Orthodox monastery in the village of Banska, before 3 gunmen and a Kosovar police officer were killed in the shootout that followed. Following the shootout, the rest of the ethnic Serb assailants fled to Serbia on foot through the woods, leaving behind vehicles loaded with weapons, ammunition and explosives. Kosovo prosecution said that a former top Kosovo Serb politician and the leader of the group, Milana Radojcic, is among the accused. Radojcic, who currently lives in Serbia, has previously publicly admitted to taking part in the gun battle. However, despite the indictment, the suspects, who are believed to be in Serbia, are unlikely to be handed over to Kosovo authorities, as Belgrade does not recognize Kosovo's independence. Wednesday marked 23 years since the September 11, 2001 terror attacks that killed 2,983 people when al-Qaeda hijackers crashed 4 jetliners into the World Trade Center in New York, the Pentagon, and a field in southwest Pennsylvania. At a commemorative event at Ground Zero, Manhattan, family members of the victims of the 9/11 attacks spoke in the memory of the lives lost that day. Prominent figures, including President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, former President Donald Trump, and running mate Senator J.D. Vance were also in attendance. Australian Olympic hockey player Tom Craig has been suspended for 12 months by Australian hockey's governing body after he was arrested in Paris attempting to buy cocaine during the Paris Olympics. Hockey Australia said that Craig's ban started on Monday following an investigation by its integrity unit into his arrest in Paris last month. It stated that 6 months of this suspension will be served fully, with the remaining 6 months fully suspended, contingent upon meeting conduct and behavioral requirements. According to the governing body, Craig will also be required to complete mandatory training and education programs. Now, 29-year-old Craig apologized to his family and teammates after he was released from police custody in Paris with just a warning.
Good morning. It's about the rain today for those of us in the upper parts of the country. Central parts of Korea are seeing on and off heavy rain this morning, which will continue all day today. And until Friday, central regions could see up to 80 millimeters. Southern provinces will mainly see rain tomorrow with 5 to 40 millimeters in the forecast. So that rain gave heat relief to central areas, but Seoul is now under a heavy rain advisory, with heat wave alerts remaining in place for most of the southern regions, with temperatures staying in the 30s this afternoon. And Seoul saw the hottest September temperatures yesterday, but readings will go down about 7 degrees lower today. And tomorrow looks to be similar to slightly hotter than today. And this afternoon, Seoul gets up to 27 degrees, still a scorcher at 32 degrees in Daegu, Gwangju, and Busan this afternoon. Now, this year's summer-like heat is planning to stay with us throughout the Chuseok holiday. Now, that's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. Arirang News will be back at 12 p.m. Korea time.